One more time. When I say jobs, you say Ohio. Jobs. Come on, jobs. Okay. We've had a lot of great speakers so far this afternoon, and I just wanted to recap for a second. Joel Mastrovich, President and COO of V&M, has been here and had a great presentation, great video. Thomas Stewart from UGA, the Ohio Oil and Gas Association, and we just heard David Mustine, who's talking about jobs. At this point, we're running a teeny bit ahead schedule, and we're going to take some other questions and comments from anybody else in the audience. So with that said, there's somebody over there that has a question. If there's a microphone, you can ask it. And I also have a friend who will help out if we can't answer questions. Rick Stouffer is on the horn over here from Gas Business Briefings, who has been in the oil and gas industry as a journalist for the past 30 years. Go ahead, miss.
My name is Kelly Scott. I'm actually from Pennsylvania. And I don't know if David is going to be able to answer a question or not. Should I ask it to him, or?
You can ask it over here.
I'll ask it over there.
Yeah.
Well, my question is, what was the biggest challenge in bringing an alliance together with all of the organizations across Ohio to develop the one true focus, which is creating jobs and making sure the talent is there to fill the jobs? How does that happen?
Okay, I am not the right person to answer that question.
Tejas.
But Rick, why don't we comment, though, about how you've seen different organizations over the past years align themselves together, which is difficult to take place. There's a lot of competing businesses, a lot of competition. If you don't mind commenting on that.
Is this on? Yeah. I think Ohio, as the speaker said, learned a lot from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is not as far advanced, I don't think, from what I've seen and the people I've talked to, as Ohio is. I mean, they seem to have all their ducks in a row. They're not forgetting about the environment, certainly. I know the Governor Kasich is very concerned about the environment. But to have all of these entities come together and be willing to work together, it really puts this state head and shoulders above what Pennsylvania is doing. Now, I know West Virginia is also not as far advanced as Ohio, but they too have been able to get some very good public-private partnerships together. So the state of Ohio needs to be commended at all levels for willing to work together because you know, this is going to be a big thing, and if you do it right, Ohio is going to once again be the center of the energy industry, really.
Excellent. Any comments from anyone in the audience before we go to our next speaker? Question? Yes, back there. Automotive industry to come in. I can actually help answer that. So, does anyone know what CNG means? Yes, compressed natural gas. Excellent. There's companies like Zaresco, which are here. From a consumer perspective, it's difficult for all of these companies to start capitalizing until the consumers can partake in natural gas. One of these ways is converting vehicles to compressed natural gas or LNG. And there's a huge force to do that. Waste Management has converted a lot of their fleet over to CNG, and right now consumers can actually do this. And Rick, you've been on the radio show before. We've talked about this with other folks. That bridge is taking place right now, where the environmentalists and the oil and gas industries are married to this idea of CNG being a proficient thing in the industry. If you want to comment on what's taking place with kind of regionally.
Yeah, Governor Corbett in Pennsylvania has come out with his Green Highway program, which he's trying to push, he's pushing it hard. And he wants to have a CNG station every 50 miles on major highways through the state of Pennsylvania. Now, I have not seen what highways he's talking about. I'm assuming the Pennsylvania Turnpike would be one of them, and probably the Interstate 70, 80, and 90 would be on the Green Highway list. But I will tell you, at Gas Business Briefing, there's not a day that goes by that we don't see a release from another company or another municipality somewhere in the country getting involved with CNG. The problem with CNG, from my perspective, is it's a little bit chicken and the egg. Which do you do first? Do you build the stations and then hope the people buy the cars or get the conversion kits so that they use the CNG? Or do the people have to buy the cars that run on CNG before they actually build the stations? That's a little bit of a tricky proposition, but things are really moving fast as far as CNG goes.
Awesome. And with that being said, we're going to introduce our next speaker of the evening or afternoon. Daniel Rice III is Managing General Partner at Rice Energy and Managing Director and Portfolio Manager of Blackrock Capital Global Resources team. Mr. Rice is also a member of BlackRock's Global Resources team responsible for small cap and all cap energy funds. I personally know Rice Energy from living in the town of Bentleyville in southwestern Pennsylvania, where they're active in bringing the oil and gas community together. And I've got to see it firsthand. My father's a physician, and we have a lot of patients that live in our community, a lot of farmers, and actually golfing, golfing facility. Golf tour, yes. But these folks are now able to build themselves into this industry and capitalize on it, and I've seen it in many different ways. So with that, I'd like to join me in a round of applause for Daniel Rice III, coming up over here.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here. If anyone has seen me talk before, I like it to be more interactive with the audience. Especially late in the day, I'll be asking periodic trivia questions on energy. Just shout out the answer. And I heard that we actually have a prize for the person who can answer the most questions. One of the frack protesters left his bicycle here by mistake. It's a nice bicycle. Whoever wins it, we'll give it to him. I'm going to talk today about the greatest opportunity I've seen in the 30-odd years I've been analyzing and investing money in energy. As we all know and we've heard today, horizontal multi-stage fracking is a game changer. It has permanently lowered the cost of electricity, home heating costs, allowed more chemical plants to be reactivated and built here in the United States. All these attributes have been widely known. There was a Business Week article a couple weeks ago, cover story, how great shale gas is. And I think everyone here at least is aware of that potential. But I think that just scratches the surface of where we are. The big opportunity we have out there is not from those good attributes, it's actually to change the way we act in the entire world. It's a way that we're going to be changing and having a severe impact on OPEC. And the way we do that is just what we were talking about before, and that is converting a portion of our passenger car fleet to using CNG. Now, Boone Pickens, as you know, has his Natural Gas Act out there, which goes after the truck fleet of the country. But the real big prize out there is converting just a portion, maybe 20–25% of the fleet that uses gasoline in passenger cars to CNG. And so I'm going to be talking about that today. See, when I mentioned to my energy friends and non-energy friends that we can have natural gas gasoline for less than $1 a gallon, and that gasoline will have the same attributes as normal gasoline except lower emissions, most of the reactions are just one of plain disbelief. Less than $1 a gallon when everyone else is paying gasoline $3.50. And it gets worse from here. Unfortunately, in the future, the $3.50 I think is going to look relatively cheap. Look, China is adding, this year they're going to add 18 million cars, next year close to 20. Within 5 years, they'll be running at 30 million cars a year. I think the most we ever had in the United States of cars was just under 15. And they'll be doubling that within a couple of years. So gasoline consumption within China is going to be continuing to go up, and we're going to be paying the price for that. You know, there's not enough supply to make up for that added demand. Prices in the world for oil are going to be going up. Best guess is where it's at $100 today. By 2015-16, it'll be $150. And instead of $3.50 gasoline, we'll be looking at $5. So the incentive to switch over to something that's substantially cheaper with basically the same attributes will be pretty high. So let's go to a little history of where we've been. I started doing energy investing in 1979 and lived through every single Secretary of Energy. First question of the day, how many Secretaries of Energy have we had since inception? Okay, the bike is going to go useless. We've had 12. In fact, when did the Department of Energy actually start? It started in 1977, and we've actually had 6 presidents since I started in 79. People will complain that we've never really had a national energy policy to speak of. And that's the reason why, our imported oil bill today is running $400 billion a year. My feeling is that there was no reason to ever have a national energy policy. There was nothing we could really do. I guess we could have opened more areas up for drilling, and that would have added some supply, not major, but some. We could have imposed a gasoline tax. We could have imposed higher, stronger, stricter economy standards for our transportation fleet. That would have decreased demand. That would have decreased our import bill. But by and large, it wasn't anything major. It isn't like we had a surplus of coal ever. We didn't really have a surplus of natural gas. It was a small surplus. It lasted 18 years, but it was like a B, 2 Bs a day of extra supply. It wasn't anything major. We tried nuclear for a while, then we had 3 Mile Island almost melt into the ground. What year was that? That was 1979 when I started. And then we had Fukushima earlier this year, which has pretty much knocked nuclear off the stool. I guess our de facto energy policy over the past 10 years has been to use more wind and solar. But let's put it in perspective. We're adding about 6,000 megawatts a year of new wind and solar. It sounds pretty impressive. We have a 900,000 megawatt electricity base in the country. So 10 years from now, we would have added maybe 60, 70,000 megawatts of green energy, less than 10% of our electricity demand within 10 years. Let's put it in perspective. Every year, China is adding between 50 and 60,000 megawatts of coal plants. Doesn't matter how green we are. The guys on the other side of the ocean in China are more than making up for carbon emissions versus what we're saving. And so, this is global warming. Mitt Romney makes the point, this isn't America warming, this is global warming. Quite frankly, it doesn't really matter what we do here in the States if China is going to continue to add, which they are going to be doing, 50, 60,000 megawatts of coal each year. The point is that our efforts in the last 10 years in terms of green technology go after electricity. Well, imported oil, the whole oil thing has nothing to do with electricity anymore. It used to back in the 1980s. They lost that market entirely. 75% of oil being consumed in the world is transportation. You look at the United States, we import 19 million barrels a day of oil. How much of that is for transportation fuel? And then the answer is, it's 15 million barrels, okay? If we want to ever do anything about our oil import bill, if we ever want to change our dependence upon OPEC, we have to hit transportation, not electricity. Electricity is fine with solar and wind, but until we find a way to put a windmill on a car or to coat a truck with solar panels, we're not going to change our dependence upon OPEC. So the thought of energy independence is pretty much a false campaign promise unless we start addressing the transportation side of the equation. So where are we today? Well, we import 11 million barrels of crude oil and products costing $400 billion. Most economists think inflation would be lower, dollar would be stronger if we weren't importing so much. If we switch 3 million barrels a day of that 12 million barrels of diesel and gasoline we consume each day, we would save $100 billion off that import bill. If we continue to develop shale oil using the same horizontal multi-stage frac technology we're using for natural gas, we'll have another 2 million barrels a day of domestic production by 2016. So you add, you say, okay, 3 million if we were able to switch by 2018 of 3 million barrels a day of diesel and gasoline, and we add 2 million barrels a day of additional oil, wow, we would have offset 5 million barrels a day of imported crude oil. That would save our economy about $175 billion a year. Now, for perspective, that doesn't mean anything to me other than I've been told 175 billion is roughly 1% higher GDP. Doesn't sound like much, but for the US is a 2% GDP growth, and it's now 3%. We've just increased that by a large amount. But that only gets at part of the question. And the real thing is, if we take 5 million barrels a day out of demand for world oil, which in fact what we'd be doing, what will happen to oil prices worldwide? And a good rule of thumb is that every 100,000 barrels a day that's either higher or lower demand or supply affects oil prices by $1 a barrel. So when Libya went down earlier this year, and they were exporting about a million and a half barrels a day because of their civil war, when they went down, it affected world oil prices by about $15 a barrel. So if 5 million barrels are taken out of the market in terms of demand, how much of an effect would that have on world prices? My last trivia question of the day. It's math. It's $50 a barrel. And you say, well, $90 a barrel today and 50, oil prices aren't going to go to 40. No. Back in 2016-17, when oil prices are $150 a barrel, it takes prices down to $100 a barrel. I mean, it doesn't sound like much, but it's a big number. And in fact, it saves the US consumers, because keep in mind, 75% of the consumers are still going to be using regular gasoline and diesel. So they're going to get $1 a gallon off their price. If we're able to have that effect on world prices, that's another $175 billion a year of savings to the economy. Okay, I'm not even talking about the multiplier effect. You add the two together, it's $350 billion. What does that mean? It affects GDP by 2%, which means if we're in an economy that's kind of a 2% world GDP for the United States, which is kind of a cruddy economy, it's kind of like what we are today. And we're not really adding significant amount of jobs. We're kind of wallowing around. It takes the economy to a 4% growth rate, and all of a sudden we're adding 5 to 10 million jobs a year in the economy, and the economy is vibrant. There's a difference between a wallowing economy and an economy that's vibrant. It's very, very important. And yet, that's the opportunity set. Now the question is, can we really get there? It sounds almost too good to be true. Like, why isn't everyone thinking about this? Why isn't every presidential candidate saying, this is where we're going to go, we're going to push it this way? The reason is there's a bunch of hurdles out there. The first and foremost is, do we have the productive capacity in this country to actually produce another 22 BCF a day? Now, the United States today is producing 70 BCF. Another 22 BCF a day of productive capacity is huge. And we have to be able to produce that without breaking cost curves. What I mean by that is, the last time we really tried to spike demand by increasing demand for what we did was back in the 1990s, when Clinton and Al Gore said, we don't like coal, we want to promote the use of natural gas. They discouraged coal. They encouraged the building of natural gas-fired generating plants. We doubled the fleet of natural gas generating plants from 75,000 to over 180,000 megawatts. And then the internet boom hit and electricity demand went up dramatically. Every single electron on the margin that was being consumed was being made by natural gas. Natural gas demand went up dramatically. And what happened to price? We didn't have enough natural gas to satisfy that demand. Natural gas prices went from $2 to $10 per MCF within a year. Now, for some of us, that was no big deal. But 50% of the population out there uses natural gas as their heating source. And they saw their home heating bills double. And they were upset. And they voted out a bunch of congressmen because of that snafu. And so Congress is very much aware they can't do, the last thing they want to do is to do anything that spikes natural gas prices, because 50% of the population out there are voters who use natural gas as a home heating. You don't want to see their bills go up because they'll vote you out of office. So Congress in general will be very, very cautious about anything that spikes demand until they're absolutely ironclad sure there's enough reserves in production that you're not going to have a spike in natural gas prices. So the big question today is, does the industry have enough wherewithal or reserves to get to 22 BCF a day of additional production? So To do that, let's say we need a 40-year reserve life, we need 300 TCF of reserves. And keep in mind, if I'm going to use a $6 limit on how much it's going to cost to bring this to fruition, almost no conventional production is going to be economic. Everything has to be unconventional, shale gas type production. It has to offset the decline curves in conventional. So I know that I need another 300 TCF of shale gas just to satisfy declines on conventional wells. So in total, I need to demonstrate I have to have 600 TCF of reserves out there dedicated that I can get to justify that I can handle 22 BCF a day of additional demand. So what do we think is out there? Well, our guess at Rice Energy is that we have 600 TCF in the Marcellus alone that's economic. You add in the Upper Devonian, the Utica, as well as the more conventional shale plays such as the Fayetteville, Haynesville, and Barnett, and the total economic reserves we have in shale gas we can develop for under $6 an MCF is 2,000 TCF. Now, put it in perspective, that's the energy equivalent of Saudi Arabia. So when you hear people say we are the Saudi Arabia of shale gas, that's what they're referring to, is that we now have Saudi Arabia available to us in terms of energy. So we can do the 22 BCF a day that this particular program would need. Now, we have a lot of things we have to get through. One, we have to add another 1,000 to 1,500 rigs in the United States in order to develop that productive capacity, but we're giving ourselves five to 6 years to be able to get to that level. The other stumbling block, of course, is pipelines. Here we have a system in the United States that delivers about 70 BCF a day. In peak periods, it delivers 95 BCF, but we have to have 95 BCF a day, 365 days a year, not 30 or 40 days a year like we have currently. So we got to build a lot more mainline pipelines. That's going to cost about $40 billion at least. Fortunately, MLPs own the pipeline, and they have very, very low cost of capital. So I think they'll be able to do it. The final infrastructure is the retail system. Now, prior speaker alluded to the fact that there's some people who are talking about putting on interstates. I think that's more like Boone's plan, at least for trucks, and if you do that for interstates, that doesn't get the job done, quite frankly. You know, basically, you have to have a gas station on almost every service station out there. You have to, I'm sorry, not a gas station, you need a pump on every service station out there. Final question is how many service stations are there in the United States? Ballpark. 120,000. So, and you need about a pump in every other one. So you need 60,000 pumps out there to give the population confidence that at any time they can go get their car filled up. That'll cost between $30 and $40 billion. So the overall cost, if you start adding everything up, is between $100 and $200 billion to switch that much gasoline into using natural gas. It sounds like a big number. I mean, that's 1 to 2 years of our bill in Iraq, annual bill in Iraq, or we're spending $100 billion a year in Afghanistan. The good news is that of that $100 to $200 billion, almost all of it can be done privately. Now, we're probably going to have to need some government backing on some bonds, but I don't think there'll be any gifts from Congress that we need. Everything, all the money that we're going to be raising can be repaid. The biggest hurdle out there probably is going to be political. I mean, think of all these things that you have to do. You have to coordinate car schedules, you have to coordinate pipeline, you have to coordinate putting retail pumps on, getting the rigs out there, drilling the wells. A lot of things have to be coordinated. We're not a centrally planned economy, we're a democracy, right? If we were a centrally planned economy like China, we'd have this done in 5 years. China would switch half their gasoline demand over in 5 years, because that's the way they work. And by 2015, they're going to be consuming 7 to 8 million barrels a day of gasoline, just a little bit less than what we are here in the United States. But they'd switch it over. They have the system to do that. So we have to actually have a political will from a president saying, we need to have this done. I'm going to be coordinating this. I'm going to get all the chief executives in the room, and we're going to set out a timetable of how we're going to get this done. And then he's going to hand it over to the Department of Energy for it actually to happen. Department of Energy right now, there's 14,000 employees full-time in the Department of Energy. They use 98,000 contractors. half of what they do is weapons related. The other half, I got to tell you, I have no idea what they're doing. They're making loans to Solyndra. It's like there's 7,000 people that I'm sure that if we put them to work doing this, we could get this whole thing coordinated. But the interesting thing is, unlike China, which really has no environmental laws to speak of, we're going to have to do this without running roughshod over our environmental lobby. And it's the environmental lobby that'll wind up probably being the toughest. They're not going to take, even though they like the fact we'll be switching from gasoline to natural gas on our transportation fuels, they're not going to be happy that we're going to have to take our drilling activity up by 50% in order to get this done. Which is why we have to be very adamant and loud on what the prize is that we're trying to get to. Let's not be naive and assume that the entity most affected by what we're trying to do is going to remain passive. And that entity, of course, is OPEC. I mean, we are really hurting OPEC by this particular topic. Well, I doubt they can overtly lobby. I mean, OPEC can't go out there and say, hey, please don't drill, you're hurting us. That's not going to fly. But what they can do is they can fund those entities that will be vocal, including the environmental groups. There's nothing wrong with a fair fight on how we manage our resources, but as a democracy, we have to be aware that sometimes we're going to get outvoted, that the benefits don't outweigh the costs. But let's make sure that the costs are real, not imagined. And when I say imagined cost, I'm talking fracking, which you've heard of. I mean, I sat in all the things today. That's what everyone is talking about. I was extremely disappointed to read, there was an op-ed piece last week, a very positive piece on natural gas, went through all the same things we've been talking about. And the author, who seemed to be pretty knowledgeable, in fact, it was Mortimer Zuckerman, who's the editor-in-chief of U.S. News and World Report. He came out and he said, look, we have to be careful because we know that fracks have contaminated some water wells, which is, as we all know, absolutely untrue. But it's an indication that even very intelligent people can be misled by the amount of propaganda out there today. We do know that ineffective cementing in shallow zones can allow shallow gas to migrate into water zones. We can tell from hydrocarbon fingerprinting that the gas is not coming from deeper zones. It has a different BTU content than the deeper Marcellus zones or the other zones we're fracking. So the contamination is not due to fracking, but to drilling. It's a systemic problem with drilling. It's more carelessness than anything else. The real risk environmental is the handling of the frac flow back. And again, this isn't a systemic risk, it's human. Can we actually turn the right valves to empty the frac water into a tank that we transfer to a truck and the driver doesn't crash the frac truck on his way to the water disposal well? That's where our risks are. My attitude is if we can't do that, we almost deserve to be a second-tier country. This is just normal. This is not rocket science. This is just blocking and tackling execution. But we need to hit the distinction between the risk of drilling and the risk of fracking. Risk of fracking is zero. Risk of drilling, there's always be some risk. But that's a much different animal in terms of arguing with people than arguing about fracking. You take out fracking in the argument, you eliminate 90% of the hysteria that occurs, like what we were seeing here today at noontime. I think our industry has to be aggressive. As a country, we need to be able to control our destiny and wean ourselves off OPEC. We've never had the opportunity to do that. We've never had any resource base that can give us that opportunity. And you certainly don't want to hang around and basically be totally dependent upon China's growth and the growth that can affect oil prices in the future, because that's going to happen. So the analogy I use in terms of how to thinking about this is vaccination. And I know sounds going to stretch, but it actually isn't. Our policy is the population herd is improved if certain diseases can't get started. We as a society believe it's worth the small number of side effects that occur every 1,000 vaccinations. In fact, the number is 1.8 side effects every 1,000 vaccinations. And we say, okay, that's an acceptable risk that basically is more than offset by the fact we're eliminating key diseases. However, back in 1998, if people remember, there was a scare on vaccinations. It was caused that vaccinations caused autism. But now, as it turns out, the person who started that scare, and it was basically picked up by every news organization out there, of course, within 4 years he was stripped of all his medical licenses, not allowed to practice. The whole thing was a fraud of what he was doing. There's been 18 epidemiological studies that have been occurred since then saying there is absolutely no causation whatsoever on vaccinations and autism. And yet, the sad fact is that 3 times as many parents today do not get their kids vaccinated as back in 1998 before this study originally came out. So we know that there is a long-term effect, no matter what happens, of people believing the worst. Both scares, both the vaccination causes autism and the fracking, we both know are untrue. Vaccination doesn't cause autism. Fracking doesn't contaminate water supplies. But as I've described here already, the benefits of fracking are every bit as important to the U.S. economy as vaccinations are to protecting the general population. Bad signs, such as the autism report or fracking fears, need to be corrected quickly and loudly. And it's just not Aubrey McClendon or Boone Pickens or Jimmy Cramer who have to carry the torch. It needs to be all of us in our dealing with friends and associates. All of us have to be aware and have to be ready to correct. I know my kids correct their teachers when the teachers start talking about fracking is dangerous. I know this because the teachers call me up. They're kind of upset. But that's what we have to do. And then they're more upset when I spiel and go on them for half an hour as to why they're really not correct. But that's what we actually have to do. I mean, the goal is we have to be able to drill a lot more. If we're able to drill and develop the reserves to actually convert a significant portion, 25% of our fleet over to using natural gas, the benefits of this economy are huge. The goal is huge. So remember, the goal is actually a better country. Thanks for letting me talk on the soapbox for a while, and I'm open for questions. Yeah, barely.
In converting vehicles over to natural gas fuels, would it be better to start working on our closed loop systems, build the supply and the demand in a lockstep with each other? For example, start with the U.S. Postal Service. All of these trucks start from a location, go out, do their runs, and they come back to the same location for refueling. Would that be the business model to get that industry started?
The quick answer is no. It has to be a lot more than that. We already have converted, I'll give you a quick example, we've converted 40 cities almost entirely over their bus fleets to using either LNG or compressed natural gas. 40 cities have been converted over. And the question I'm going to ask you, this is our final question, trivia question, how much of oil demand per day are they backing out? And keep in mind in diesel that we consume 3 million barrels a day of diesel in the United States. So we've taken our 40 basically largest cities, converted them all over their bus fleets to natural gas. How much oil are we backing out? We're backing out about 1,500 barrels a day. So your point is a good point. It would be a nice start, but it's immaterial. It just doesn't matter. We have to get hard at the passenger cars and the truck system. And the only way you can do that is a coordinated policy. It's the classic, we talked about it, chicken and the egg. I'm not buying my car until I know there's a service station. GM's not building the car till they know it's a service station and they know I'm going to buy the car. So, and guess what? They're not going to build the car until they know there's enough natural gas that prices don't spike to $6 a gallon and make it uneconomic. So you got to get a bunch of entities in the same room and have a long-term timetable to get this thing going. Is that a good answer? Thanks. Thanks.
That pretty much answered that, but the question is, where do we start and what steps do we take to build that full capacity? Until we have CNG at every gas station on every corner in the country, what steps do we have to go through to build that capacity? Also, the Natural Gas Act that you mentioned, T. Boone Pickens is working on. I have to note that our local congressmen, Steve Latorette and Tim Ryan, are both supporters of that as a step toward converting our truck fleets over to natural gas.
I appreciate that. You know, that Boone's Act is not going to pass. He's asking for a handout in terms of a subsidized engines of as much as $30,000–$40,000. You don't need it. The payback period today on a new engine with today's differential is about 2 years. So you don't need a federal handout. What you do need is a coordinated policy coming down from the president. So we need a president that can step up and in conjunction with the Secretary of Energy, actually get the people in the room. And you don't start small. It just doesn't matter. Smallness, you know, like I said, the bus fleet in the country, it's 1,200 barrels a day. It's just not material. But so you have to be ready to, with a coordinated policy that the startup date is 2015, and you're going to have 500,000 cars ready at 2015, and you're going to have 10,000 pumps ready to go, spread it across, and then you build on that over the next 3 years so that you get the full system built out. Any other questions? Yep.
So the key is distribution. You've got to be able to convert or add to Joe's filling station the ability to provide gas to the passenger vehicles. Can you provide a snapshot of what that would look like? Is it a couple 1,000-gallon tanks in the ground, and what's the delivery system to the filling station? How does that happen?
Yeah. I was actually surprised when I started researching how much it would cost to convert Joe's filling station and put one pump out of his 6 pumps dedicated to natural gas. And let's assume that the gas line is going right by his, like it typically would be across the country. There'd be a gas line within 100 feet of his station. It cost about $500,000. The number is a staggeringly large number. I would have thought it would have been more like 100,000. It's $500,000. And so if you have 60,000 stations, half our stations need to have at least one gas pump. 60,000 stations at 500,000 is $30 billion. Now, Huntsman, you say, okay, who's going to pay for that? Because a lot of the service stations are mom and pops, right? The majors have gotten away. They've sold down their stations. Huntsman basically has come out and say, look, let's threaten antitrust legislation against service stations because they're favoring gasoline and diesel, and they're keeping out natural gas. And the threat of that lawsuit will give them public loans also. We'll give them low-cost loans. And the threat of that will get them to actually convert and actually invest the $500,000 they need to put in their own pumps. It'll be U.S. dollars will be paid back through their proceeds. Well, you know, gasoline, we can make natural gas gasoline today for less than $1. Okay, let's throw on 50 or 75 cents of taxes to pay back those loans. Well, that's still $2 less than gasoline out there, and I tell you, when this thing starts in 2015-16, it'll be $3.5 a gallon less. So I don't think we're going to be hampering the demand growth for natural gas, and there is a method for paying it back, but it is expensive. Again, you got to force it from the top down. You know, we can make this like the Apollo program and you need a great attitude. You need a leader to actually get people enervated and realize just how significant it can be. You have to have someone who's not anti-fossil fuel. I'll ask them any questions because I wasn't supposed to start until now. So, any other questions? Yeah. Okay, what price do you need for natural gas to keep this development? And that was one of the cost questions I was saying, is that we have to be able to develop this for about less than $6 an MCF. Okay, if you can do it for less than $6, let's put it in perspective. That's about $40 a barrel is what I'm making my gasoline for it. So it's about $1.20 gasoline. That's what it will cost to make the gasoline. Yeah, and so I think we can find and put on stream that gasoline for that natural gas for less than $6 across the country on all the shale plays. Yeah, it really is not affordable at $3.50, but at $5.50 or $5, every shale play in the United States is pretty economic. At $6, every shale gas play is. And my resource numbers that I'm talking about are using a cutoff of $6 an MCF as the price in terms of whether it's economic or not. And we'll have 2,000 TCF of reserves.
At $500,000 a crack to build a facility to fuel natural gas vehicles, would it be possible for a system or a program where the government would either guarantee the loan on building those facilities or else build those facilities with the idea that you're going to lose money the first 5 years and then they could auction them off to the mom and pops and sell them at that point at a lower cost?
Yes, good points and all possibilities. I mean, I don't think it's a killer. I think the government could easily offer, let's say there's 30 billion, 15 billion will be built by Shell and ExxonMobil. The other 15 is mom and pops. Good, you just offer them 2-3% type loans. They'll make that money back in terms of what they can charge for the distribution of the natural gas. So it's very doable. And if they can't do it, there's ways of auctioning it off, and I'm sure there's entities out there that will find it's a great rate of return, will go in and buy service stations just for that reason. Take advantage of the low-cost loans that will be out there. So that's not going to be the reason why this doesn't happen. You know, the real reason why this isn't going to happen, it'll come from the top. People will just say I don't want to get involved fighting the environmentalists the rest of my life. You know, that's what's going to happen. So you have to have a relatively strong president. And you actually have to get the environmental lobby on your side. I think you can do that.
You said that 50% of the households power their house or heat their house by natural gas, so they already have it in their home. I see electric vehicles being charged in the home. Is it possible to put natural gas into your car at home?
I've looked at that also, and I think there's a system out there that costs about $6,000 where you can fuel the system in your home, except municipalities get into the equation, and a few municipalities have requested that if you're going to do something like that, that you get a special permit. So I think it's a little bit dangerous to be doing it in your house. And if you're able to put pumps on service stations, there's no reason for it to be doing it in the house. But it's possible, I guess. And it costs $6,000. But personally, I wouldn't want it in my house. I'd rather have it at the service station down the street. Yes?
Have you thought about, like, if you kept it mobile all the time, like if you just bring in a tanker, what's the cost of just a pump itself? Someone could tool up a gas station if they thought that it was a reasonable investment and they were getting a decent return. But you could bring in maybe two, like a tractor trailer that brings in a mobile tank. They could just drop it there and then go somewhere else and pick up an empty. Or maybe if there was two at a central located place, you could just take an empty with you, go refuel it somewhere, take it somewhere else, and just keep it like a local thing there?
Well, I think what you're getting at is the fact that the number today is 500,000. When we were looking at trucks 3 years ago, the cost of getting a natural gas engine was 80,000, and today the quotes are 30 to 40,000. So my quote on the service station is $500,000 today, but innovative thinking like what you're thinking is going to come out, and they'll take the cost down to a couple $100,000, but I'm kind of giving a worst case guess as to what I think the costs really are going to be. Because there are going to be entrepreneurs like what you're talking about that'll provide that service without having any upfront costs to the service station. They'll bear the costs. That'll save money. but I think that's down the road.
Yeah, maybe a $10,000 investment by a gas station for a pump to take a test drive, and then as you find out where your demand is, you could just move the whole system out.
Agree. But you can imagine how many jobs and how much innovation is becoming in our economy just to service a innovative sector like this is and will be developing. Because everyone will look at 500,000 and say, that doesn't sound right. I think I can do it for much less, and I can make money off of that. Yeah. Anything else? Yes? The question is, do I think Ohio will look like Houston? Is that a positive or negative? Yeah, it won't look like Houston because Houston is surrounded by petrochemical plants. And I don't, other than you're going to have one or two big ethane crackers, either in Pennsylvania or Ohio. But other than that, you're just going to have wellheads. And you'll have the odd drilling rig that you see every 3 or 4 miles. So I think it'll still be relatively pristine.
Our MC mentioned that we're so lucky to have a second chance at a natural resource in this area. And I know you're speaking of the steel mills, and we know what happened with the steel mills. What projections are there or steps being taken that our children aren't looking at this area in the same state that we see it and just replacing the word steel with gas?
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it, because there's always a risk that it'll be an industry. But think of it another way, is that your children are going to be sitting there paying $6 and $7 a gallon for gasoline. The economy will be 1 to 2% a year, and they won't be able to get jobs. And this whole industry can revitalize the country. And that's what we're playing for. Great, thank you very much.
You got it? I think that's it, yeah. All right, well, great job. That was a wonderful presentation and very relative to exactly what's going on here. I also commend Rice Energy and the family that they have there, because I've had some conversations with the CEO who lives near us, and it's awesome to see that these are actual real people. This isn't just an oil and gas company or something like that. It's a person, and there's other people behind this driving force. And it's hard to imagine that they can just be people. I wanted to give a couple takeaways from this, but the first one is that because we were a little bit ahead of schedule, they're going to move up the open bar and the food to 5 o'clock, which is just around the corner. Thank you, sir. And secondly, a couple wrap-ups. So everybody needs to take this away from this. With vision and potential, you can become lucky. The definition of lucky is preparation plus opportunity. So lucky equals preparation plus opportunity. Youngstown and Ohio now have the perfect opportunity, and the rest of the world has been preparing for this type of a technology to take place. So the reason that I mention that is now that we're on an exponential curve with our society, our nanotechnology, our medicine, all these different things, this region, and Ohio specifically, can really capitalize if it happens properly, which is the goal. And with that being said, please do your due diligence. So go on the internet, read information, find people in the industry, talk to UGA, talk to some of the presenters that we've had here. Even the oil and gas companies, you can call phone numbers there to ask questions. So due diligence and the yearning for knowledge will pull us all through this. And then we can all be lucky together.